And we got a lot of ground I want to cover this morning, so I'm going to try to do so. And if I have to cut my sermon short a little, I will do that as we go along. I want Skylar to pass this out. We got the spiritual sword, and one per family. And then, Skylar, if there's some left, put them on the table. And after you have one for your family, if there's one on the table and you want an extra one, get that and send it to give it to someone else if you want it, or if you just need two for some reason. Or if you take one when you're through with it, bring it back and someone else can use it. Or if you want to keep it, just keep it as a keepsake because you may want to refer to it later. The spiritual sword, this issue is on the best life. And the text that this begins with is from 1 Peter 3, 10 through 12. Part of that says, he that will love life and see good days. That sounds good, doesn't it? Do you love your life? Well, I hope you do. Some people don't like their life. How is it that some people can have a life that they love and other people have a life I wish I didn't even have this life. And then to see good days. Now, we're going to see bad days in life. I mean, that's part of life. But the bad days do not define your life. How do you live in such a way that you are so glad you get to live this life, and a life that is characterized by days that are good? Well, we're going to be talking about that. Before I do it, though, I want to go to this. We subscribe to the spiritual sword, and we utilize the publication House to House, Heart to Heart. And every time they send an issue out to the community, they send us a packet of tracts. I think there's 13 tracts, new tracts back there. And I'm not going to go over all of them. I'll kind of run down through the titles. The feature article that we have sent to every home now, from Viola to McMinnville, it's gone into every home and every post office box. The feature article is about Jesus. Is Jesus real or only a legend? You know, people become legends. Some people become legend in their own days, but a legend. Are these stories about Jesus? The idea is all people, he was pretty good, but you really can't know who Jesus was. These stories exaggerated and blown up, and down through the centuries, these stories have grown and turned to Jesus into something that he wouldn't even recognize himself. That's the way that a lot of people think about Jesus. Well, this article goes into the documents that we have that explain Jesus to us. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're written right at the time that Jesus lived. Shortly thereafter, there wasn't enough time for this to grow into a legend. And then the other characteristics of those books show that, no, they're talking about real events. When I teach from the book of Mark, I try to point that out as we go through. These are not cunningly devised fables. There are things in those stories that are told that give them a genuineness and an authenticity that is unexplainable, except that that's what happened. That's the way you explain it. Well, it must have happened then. And so that's what this article goes into. And there's a lot of other things always in this that is just good material, and they're well written. And so for your own benefit, and then if your neighbor, your neighbor's getting this, just think, okay, I could ask them, did you get that in the mail? Did you read that part about, and see if you can get a little conversation going. Now, there's a little card out there on Israel. It's about the geography of Israel. They send these little cards. Other tracts, In Pursuit of Patience. The failures of the nation. It is a tract about Judges chapter 1. How they failed to do that nation of Israel. They went into the promised land and failed to do what God told them to do. And how that brought their woes and their downfall. The left-handed judge, remember him? Ehud. He went in to see the king and they searched him. But he didn't have his sword on his left side. His dagger, he had it on his right side because he was left-handed. And so he was able to slay King Eglon that was oppressing Israel. Remember that story? Well, there's a thing about that. The one of them favors my preacher says. You can't count on what your preacher says. Sorry about that. Preachers will say anything. You've got to count on what the Bible says. That's what you've got to. But a lot of people say, well, my preacher says. What does the Bible say? That's the authority. How to invest time wisely, prayer, how to dress for worship. That's a good track back there. You know, there's a lot of different styles and opinions. And I'll tell you, our brethren have a wide range of tolerance on how people dress, don't they? There's no Bible dress code. I was at a church in South Florida, and they had to impose a dress code because, to say good about that church, they're out there reaching out into the community, reaching people that need help, bringing them into the assemblies, baptizing them into Christ. And they had a lot to learn. We had a fellow that would stand up to wait on the Lord's table with a T-shirt. I think it had Budweiser advertised on it. Well, the elders, he did that. The elders took him aside and said, look, that's not our dress code. When you're going to wait on the Lord's table, you don't need to wear T-shirts with beer advertisements on. And you think, well, everybody ought to know that. No. Listen, if we're doing what we ought to do, we're outreaching into the world, bringing people into the assembly, and they're going to have a lot to learn. And we're going to, with patience and long suffering, we're going to help teach people. And yet there's a wide range here. But it's a good article on things to consider about how you dress. And a lot of time we think about how women dress. There's so many ways women can dress that I tell you, if I had to fool with all that you ladies fool with, I'd be a nervous wreck, wondering how am I going to look. But there's men too, and particularly men, think about how you're going to appear when you're up in front of the church. Now, you might be able to come in dressed in ways that, you may not always be able to dress the way you want to. You come into church anyway. If you're out in the field working and you're just really not all that cleaned up, you don't have time, come on to church. Come to church. We're not going to judge you just on your clothes. But if you're going to be up in front of the church, think about that a little bit. How is my appearance going to reflect the significance of what we're doing? And just give that some thought then into how you make your decision on how you appear. So how to dress for worship. It's a good track. This is what I signed up for. Talking about what does it mean to become a Christian? Well, this is what and it's a positive track. This is what I wanted out of Christian life. Some about parenting. God's counting on you, Dad. 10 mothers, 10 lessons, 10 years. A little old mother who changed the world. And then what good things happen to good people? A book written, Why the Bad Things Happen to Good People. It was written by a Jewish rabbi, but still it had a lot of good words in there about suffering and such. Why the bad things? But why the good things happen to good people? Good things do happen. And God blesses. That's what that comes down to it. There's a whole series of tracts on this. This just happened to be that one. So those tracts are out there, and those are the ones at the top. The new ones are at the top. You might want to pursue those or some of the others and take those with you. But now I want to get into this lesson. The best life He that will love life and see good days. And then Peter tells us how to do that. You want to love life and see good days? This is what you do. Let him refrain his tongue from evil, and his lips that they speak no guile. Let him eschew evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it, or ensue it. For the eyes of the Lord are over the righteous. His ears are open to their prayers, but the face of the Lord's against them that do evil. Doesn't that tell you how to have a good life? The good life is the righteous life. According to God's standard of righteousness. That's what gives you the good life. I was reminded of Abraham when I read this. I don't think this is in the publication, but I was reminded of Abraham. We were studying in Wednesday night not long ago. Genesis 25 and verse 8. Abraham gave up the ghost and died in a good old age. Well, that's what death is, isn't it? When you give up the ghost. The spirit returns to the Lord who gave it, and the body returns to dust. Abraham gave up the ghost and died in a good old age. And here he was, an old man full of years, and was gathered to his people. I almost want to insert in my Bible, I think I know what Moses is getting at here. They're full of good years. Abraham lived 175 years. Well, that's a lot of years, but they were full years. It didn't mean that Abraham didn't have some bad years, but it's characterized by good years. He must have loved his life, and then eternal life. Gathered to his people. I said, that is the epitaph of a successful life, isn't it? How did Abraham do that? Well, the author here, or the editor, Alan Hires, is going to go into Solomon. You compare that to Solomon. Abraham and Solomon, now they were both rich men, but Abraham's life was not characterized by his riches, it's characterized by faith. Solomon was characterized by riches. He's probably the richest man that lived at that time and maybe ever. But he had anything he desired. And it's a depressing book. Vanity of vanity. It's nothing. There's nothing to this. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. All is vanity. What profit is it? He got to be an old man and look back over his life, and he had pursued everything that was empty. The world says, you do this, you'll have a good life. And he did it. And he got old and looked at it and said, oh, it was just, what profit? It was empty. It wasn't satisfying. And then he tells you how to have a good life right at the end. And he's talking to young people. Young people, just hear this. You little girls, listen right now. Listen. Poke them. Make sure they're listening. Listen right now. Okay? You want to have a good life? Remember this. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Okay? If you forget about God, you're not going to have a good life. The world might look at you and you might be in lights and be rich and stylish and famous, and you're not going to be happy if you forget God. Look at the bulletin. I reprinted. I'm not going to read it because I'm going to be short on time, but I reprinted what Alan Hire said about people that, well, you're young, time to sow your wild oats. No, it isn't. Don't do that. Start young. Says, I'm going to remember God. Now, you enjoy your youth, but you remember the Creator. And then the conclusion, fear God and keep His commandments. If you get this, if you'll do that, you're going to have a good life. These commandments are for our good. So remember God, respect God, do what He says. It'll come out good. God knows. And then there's a judgment. You're going to be held accountable. So remember your Creator if you want to have a good life. Now, here's how to ruin your life. That's the first part. About half of this, I could call it, here's how to ruin your life. If you want to make your life a mess and ruin your life, then live like an animal. You know, we are animals in the sense that we got to live in this material world, and we have all these passions and desires, and these things in and of themselves are not wrong. In fact, they're necessary for us to survive under the sun in this world. But if we think that is what we're living for and give ourselves over to that, you're going to ruin your life, because you're not just an animal. You are an eternal spirit that has a temporary body. And the spirit is to master the flesh. Here's how to ruin your life. Give yourself over to your flesh. That'll ruin it. Here it is, the works of the flesh. You want to ruin your life? Here's a list of things you can do to make your life horrible. Adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings. Do that. You just do it. And your life is going to be a mess. But you don't have to do any of those things. Do something like that. It says, and such like. There's not a complete list, but there's enough to let you know, isn't there? And you know the things that are like that. Do something like that, and you'll ruin your life. 2 Peter 2 and verse 2's got a good list of things on ruining your life. Let me go through them real quick. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but I just wanted to read out. You want to ruin your life? Listen to false prophets and false teachers and believe damnable heresies and deny the Lord and walk in pernicious ways with covetousness. Feigned words, that is, they're pretend words. They're hypocritical words. Feigned words, ungodliness, filthy conversation, wickedness, unlawful deeds, unjust, walk after the flesh, the lust of uncleanness, despise government. That's authority. You want to rebel against authority? Against God's designated authorities? That's a good way to ruin your life. Here, presumptuous, self-willed, speaking evil at dignities, live as a natural, brute beast. There you go. Riot, unrighteousness, sporting themselves in their own deceivings. You know, that's the worst kind of deception, isn't it? When you deceive yourself. When you convince yourself of something that is false because you want to believe it. And that's the hardest deception to overcome, is when you're deceiving yourself. Having eyes full of adultery, and then look, cannot cease from sin. It'll get to where you can't stop it. You get into it, and you can't pull out of it. Sin will capture you and pull you down and hold you, and you can't get away. And you're ruined. You are ruined. Hebrews 10, 24 through 26 talks about the pleasures of sin. Sin is tempting because it offers pleasures, but it's only for a season. It's just a brief little pleasure with a lot of misery following in its wake. Moses knew better than that. 2 Thessalonians 2, 11 through 12. There's pleasure in unrighteousness, but there's no fulfillment there. And you're going to be accountable. And there's an eternity. You don't want those pleasures. I was asked to write on this. At the last it biteth like a serpent. I'll let you read the article. I'm not going to go into it. It's talking about drinking alcohol. See, at the last, it bites like a serpent. But then there's other things that are like that. Chasing after money, the love of money will bite like a serpent. Going after strange women, that'll bite you like a serpent. We're going to talk about Samson downstairs in our class. He sure got bit by that. Strange women will bite like a serpent, and other things. And then there's examples of people that just gave themselves over to sin, and it got to them at the last. People say, well, what if you just drink alcohol in the privacy of your own home? Well, do you want to play with a serpent in the privacy of your own home? It'll get you. That's the thing. These things will get you, and you want to leave it alone. And then the reward of iniquity. What was that reward? 30 pieces of silver? Well, you remember he went out and hung himself and fell and burst asunder. That was Judas's reward. The reward of iniquity is not the reward you want. But then, after you've read about half of this, you get this article that Wayne Langford wrote on walking in the light. And it is. It's just like, if you'll read this, read it through, is it when you get to Wayne Langford's walking in the light, and it's like the light comes on. Walking in the light. Walking in fellowship with God and godly people. Walking in newness of life. Walking in truth. Walking in the Spirit. Walking by faith. All this has to do with living the way God tells us to live in this wonderful book. And learn these lessons, and you're going to have a good life. That's how you do it. Galatians 5:22 through 25. After the works of the flesh, which are manifest, Paul writes of the fruit of the Spirit. It's love. Want a life of love or hate? Well, you want love. You want joy or sorrow? You want joy. You want turmoil or peace? You want peace. Long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. It's not a complete list. The works of the flesh and such like. The fruit of the Spirit and such like. You get the picture. You don't have to just say, this is the whole list. I'm going to check off the list. No, this is the kind of thing, such as this. And that's how you walk in the Spirit. Romans 12. The article in there is called the Romans 12 person. The Romans 12 person. I don't have it all here, but the whole chapter. That's a chapter you want to learn how to live well. Romans 12. Your bodies is a living sacrifice. Forget this, it's my body. I have a right to do what I want to with it. It's the Lord's body. Your body belongs to the Lord. What does the Lord want you to do with your body? Presented a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service, not conformed to this world, transformed by the renewing of your mind. You want to renew your mind? Take these teachings and put them in your mind, and it will renew your mind. You'll think different. Look how he goes on. Think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but think soberly. It teaches you how to think. Let your thoughts align with God's thoughts. Love without dissimulation. Abhor that which is evil. Cleave to that which is good. I'm going to let you go down that list because I don't want to keep you too long. I'm going to have to cut this a little short. But go down Romans chapter 12 and see, look at the end. Do not overcome of evil. Overcome evil with good. I mean, the Bible lays it out for us. And read it. Meditate on it. Let that become the person that you are. Be a Romans 12 person. The first Psalm, blessed, blessed. As I understand it in the Hebrew, that word is plural. It's talking about bliss, not just happiness, but beyond happiness, bliss. And I heard a fellow say, but by the way, it's emphasized grammatically in the position that word falls in that sentence. You could express the maybe emotion of it by saying this: oh, the blessednesses of the man. Well, there's some things he doesn't do. This man, he doesn't walk in the counsel of the ungodly or stand in the way of sinners or sit in the sin of the scornful. His delight's in the law of the Lord. I tell you, you pick up this book and say, okay, what do I have to do? Well, it's not going to bring you much joy. But if you delight in learning what God would have you to do, this book is just going to be a book that thrills you because I delight in that. And then you'll be like a tree planted by the rivers of water. See, these words are that rivers of water. And you've got your spiritual roots sunk deep into this soil of these words. And it's good soil. And it's moist soil. And you thrive on this. You'll be like a tree planted by the rivers of water. And you're not going to wither when those bad days come. You'll bring forth your fruit in the season. Revelation 2, 8 through 12 talks about the church at Smyrna. That's where we read, be faithful unto death, I'll give you a crown of life, and he that overcometh shall not be hurt of the second death. The second death. You read about that later. That's when you're thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone. The second death. There are two other articles in here. One about the reality of hell and the hope of heaven. You do not want to live a life in fear of hell. You want to live with the hope of heaven. That's what will give you the good life. Well, as I read of this, I thought of 1 Timothy 4 and verse 8. Bodily exercise profiteth little. Bodily exercise, that's not going to the gym and workout. That's having to do, you've got to deal with material, earthly, worldly things because we're in this world and we're subject to that vanity and we got to do it. But if that's what your life consists of and you do that well, you'll have a little benefit out of that. But godliness, that's profitable in all things. Having the promise of life that now is the best life you can live right now is a life of godliness. But see, it also carries with it a promise of life to come. You can excel in bodily exercise and miss the life to come. But godliness gives you the best now and that which will be. Go home and use this for your private devotions. Consider these things and read these things. I was reading about a great preacher of the past. I won't call his name, but the reason he became a preacher is because he found out that he had joy in making people happy. And he kind of went on a search, kind of like Solomon did. He said, I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to find out what makes people happy. And his conclusion was, what makes people happy is bringing them to Christ. That's where they find. And so he decided to spend his life as a preacher of the gospel of Christ because he knew that would be the best way to give people a life of joy. Well, that is true. That much is true. That's the best life. And you can live it. You can show your children how to live it. and you can show others how to live it. And if you want that life, I tell you, you have to humble yourself. It's not a life of pride. You have to come to Christ. Say, I believe, Jesus, you are the Son of God. I'll confess that before men with my mouth. You want me to be baptized? That's what I am going to do. I'm going to do it the way you said it, by immersion. I'm going to do it for the reason you said do it, for the remission of my sins. I'm going to come up out of that water and live that life. That is the good life. You want to enter into that life, it's being born again. You can do it. Let us know that while we stand and sing the invitations.